Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Joanne MacDonald. Joanne joined our UPEI School of Nursing in 2002, coming from 20 years' experience in various roles in PEI public health programs. She completed her Bachelor of Nursing degree at St. Francis Xavier and a Master of Nursing degree at Dalhousie. And in her teaching role, Joanne focuses on community health nursing, nursing fundamentals, and clinical instruction. She's also acquired, together with her teaching, an impressive record of publication, funded research projects, in particular looking at HIV/AIDS and hepatitis C. And this year, congratulations, Joanne. Joanne has completed her PhD in nursing from McGill University. And this year also, sometime before we call it the end of fall, Joanne and her colleagues in nursing are going to be moving into a brand new, sparkling above-ground building, something else to be happy about. And this morning, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Joanne MacDonald to speak to us about raising youth voices, and we can see that there's a subscript or a further piece of the title that will give us an indication of just how exciting this is going to be. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you so much. So as you can see from my title of this talk today, it's about involving youth, and it's about involving youth in the development of nursing intervention. And in this case, I'm interested in how do you help youth to develop skills for beginning risk prevention and sustaining that behavior. And of course, we want to do that for the prevention of sexually transmitted infections. Now, this is a qualitative school-based study, and a qualitative approach is very appropriate when you're developing interventions because you do want to get right to the heart of the matter with youth. You want to understand their insight and their client perspectives. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to tell you a little bit about this study today. And when I think about how exciting the prospects are for developing a program of research at UPEI, I really think Sidney Crosby stole my line. Because he said, wouldn't it be amazing to wake up every day, get up and do what you always love to do? Well, this didn't happen without the help of a lot of people. I want to thank first and foremost the study participants, especially the youth who gave so freely of their time, and they really provided incredible input. There are other important stakeholders, public health nursing. These nurses often provide a portion of the HIV/STI skills prevention unit. I acknowledge the Department of Education and the Eastern School Board where curriculum delivery takes place. And I also want to acknowledge some of the members of my research team. They're sitting over at this table over here. Give a little wave. And my UPEI colleagues, and most notably the mentorship that I received from Drs. Cunningham and Bryanton as I was on this journey. I would be remiss without giving a quick plug also for the funders, the Canadian Nurses Foundation and the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. Over the next now 19 minutes, I'm going to take you through my talk, and we'll start with issue and significance. I'll focus on my findings with my youth participants, and then I'll bring you to what I see as the next steps for this project. Now, this is quite an important issue, and despite decades of efforts, nurses, educators, others, all of these extensive attempts to help prevent negative outcomes with our youth, we're still finding that we are very much in the face of the HIV/AIDS pandemic and escalating rates of other STIs. Now, as one possible explanation, this suggests that youth may not be being reached with prevention education. There's some important local information, as this study was conducted here on PEI. So what is it like in our little idyllic little island province? We have rates of sexual activity that are comparable to Canadian rates in 15 to 19-year-olds. Although chlamydia, the age-adjusted rates in the 15 to 19-year-olds are lower than the national average, they are about 2 to 3 times that of males. We know that the reported rate of HIV is low, likely because the pool of infection is low in this area. But also we have to recognize that our youth may be more vulnerable to STIs and the negative consequences. And that's 2 reports that have been undertaken in the last 10 years tell us that we do have a lack of youth-friendly sexual health services, and we also live in a community where the conservative views of sexuality predominate. The school-based sexual health curriculum was under revision at the time of this study, and this study did provide an opportunity for the youth perspective regarding the factors affecting the development of skills to prevent sexually transmitted infections. How do you know that you want to approach working in this way? So you go to the literature, and what do you find? Well, in terms of school-based sexual health interventions, some of the more recent systematic reviews have shown that although health-promoting schools are very important, and this is an important place to do this kind of work, there's really inconclusive evidence regarding the effectiveness of these types of interventions. They have tended to focus on individual risk, and there have been without promising results. Very few interventions have been able to report longer-term successes. The interventions that I reviewed were not well described, often not tailored to meet the unique needs of the target group, and explicit youth involvement was very rare in their development. One of the emerging types of research that was particularly in the international literature was participatory research that actually includes youth perspectives and works toward promoting behavior change through involvement of youth. So it was clear that there needed to be more studies which addressed the involvement of youth to develop and evaluate curriculum in the sexual health area, and that there needed to be more use of participatory and arts-based methods that could help develop resources for the prevention of STIs. And I acknowledge that arts-based methods are perhaps more common in more general education areas and sometimes in reproductive health, but they're really not well developed in the areas of prevention research for STIs and HIV. I did have an overall purpose. This was quite a large study, and it was guided by 4 questions. My purpose is actually subsumed in the first question here. What factors do youth identify as being important to facilitate their ability to take control of their sexual health behavior? And because I was engaging them in a curriculum development process, you see here some other questions that relate to the content and the process issues. So what do they perceive there needs to be? How then do they perceive the new resources that we developed as a result of this process? And the 4th question is really an overarching one that really informed me about how the intervention was developed. So I did design, this is the setting. There were 2 senior high schools in the Eastern School District selected on geographic location and access to other health services. I did design a 3-phase exploratory design with participatory approaches. It's appropriate to use an exploratory design when you are looking for new insights and new understanding from your clients. So once I had negotiated access to the study population, I maximized that participatory approach with the youth. I drew on their input and experiences, and that helped to inform the design. The key method that I did use was the focus group. These are particularly relevant to understanding in-depth perceptions of youth, as they often use jargon that's peculiar to the age group and their own cultural experience. It's not as common to have a conceptual framework to guide this type of study, but because I was developing an intervention, it was important to look to where do you find guidance, and because we know that individual behavior is important, So I drew on theories about individual behavior from the social sciences, and a social ecological model provided the context that yes, there's individual behavior, but it does occur within various subsystems. So at the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the subsystems with parents, teachers, organizations such as schools, and the broader community. So this provided that perspective. As you can see here, my participants were students who were in either grade 10 or 11. They had previously participated in or were in the Family Life Education program. They had provided written consent, and they had the consent from their parents. And we recruited them to 4 focus groups based on grade and gender. What you see here before you is a summary of the first phase. Recall that I had said it was a 3-phase study. So this is about engaging the participants. And so what you see here is a series of iterative focus groups. They were conducted by trained youth facilitators who were similar in age to the participants. And you also see here that I have interspersed periods of analysis. So the data collection and the analysis were dynamic and concurrent with phases of data collection in an iterative manner. And it's the type of analysis that I used interspersed here was a thematic type of analysis. And with an exploratory study, you're moving forward with a discernible effort to transform data toward descriptive themes. So for example, the youth facilitators engage the students in the issues of their sexual health education needs. Then they move them in part 2 to using participatory activities like reflective writing, drawing, and drama, another period of analysis. And because there are other important subgroups which reflect back to my conceptual framework, you see here that I have vetted some of the early work through groups of parents and through professionals in the form of nurses and teachers. And then another layer of analysis, and actually based then on the input from the youth, I had a schema that guided the further development of the materials that would be used for STI prevention. In the second phase, this was all about moving the materials forward, developing them in a way, and because there was a concurrent initiative with enhancing the existing school-based curriculum, I was able to present my preliminary work to a local expert panel. We workshopped that information and we refined it into new materials that were consistent with the new curriculum outcomes in the department, and some further revisions with an expert in this sexual health area, and linking back to what are appropriate adolescent developmental growth principles as well as appropriate teaching principles. This working back and forth, and again using the schema, the input from the youth, we had at least four new curriculum resources that were available to use with the youth in the next phase of the study. So just as a sample here, some character development for role play, some vignettes about youth's experiences with trying to prevent STIs, an interactive poster board that assessed for risk, and an interactive card game. So in the final phase, the same students from the first phase returned. We used, again, a trained nurse, and the youth facilitators acted as co-facilitators in that situation. So they actually worked through the use of these resources. They gave their input. We did a further level of analysis, and we made revisions as necessary and came up with some final recommendations. In addition to the concurrent analysis that was happening with the data, in order to answer that overall arching research question, what can be learned about the development of a curriculum with youth, myself and another colleague reread every scrap of data that we had, the focus groups, the field notes, the summaries about how each group answered our questions, and because in this type of research you want to be documenting everything you're doing, why you did that, so we reviewed every action and decision, and by using content analytic techniques we were able to explore these new relationships. And this really informed us in how we had worked through the development of the intervention. As you can see here on this slide, this is a slide that shows the different phases. You can see that the students, you can see their mean ages. You can see that the age range was 15 to 17 years. 28 of the 30 participants in Part 1 focus groups returned for Part 2. And for the final phase, 22 of the 28 that had completed Part 2 focus groups returned for the final phase of the study. Now, we had some interesting findings in the data, and collectively, I have to tell you that the findings actually demonstrate that youth, when provided with an opportunity for input, became engaged with the issue of sexual health, and they really did make a valuable contribution. They described many inherent tensions, and that's why you see on one side you see negative influences, you see positive influences on the other side. This is at the interpersonal level, and the words you see there are actually their words from the data. And we found that this fell out at different levels. And again, it does model the conceptual framework at the interpersonal level. So there were negative influences from peers, but there were also on the positive side. They liked learning in groups and so on. Again, their words appear here. We also found that we could analyze and find information at the level of the school that broke down into content and process issues. On the side here of the negative influences, by times they found things too repetitive or too basic, not relevant to their lives and circumstances. But you also see that there are positive solutions as well on the other side. They're striving for real and relevant things in their lives. They want an interactive approach, and they really want to include peer models in their teaching. This is a good news story here because what this says is a teacher can make a big difference. So on the positive side, teachers who are very open about the topic, who are very comfortable, who are very passionate and prepared to teach, can make a big impact on youth as they are on their journey with this topic. Here's something where we need some work. So at the community level, we see a predominance here of negative influences. Although physicians and nurses would be perceived as sources of health information and received as confidential, but on the negative side, particularly in smaller communities, the confidentiality at the level of the individual and the possible risk that involved just overcomes them. They also believe that they are monitored and that their behavior is watched closely very much by the community, and that they don't receive the appropriate respect by community members. So in looking to what does this mean in terms of answering some of my research questions, in terms of youth sexual health education needs, things that the youth really provided me with are that the content does need to be real and relevant. You need to tell us stories, use games, use interaction. We want teachers who are non-judgmental, who are competent to teach this topic. And they were also very clear in telling us what did not work. So there are all kinds of opportunities for solutions there. This is just one example as a profile of a resource that we actually did develop here. So, and it really does resonate with being relevant and realistic in their lives. It encourages critical thinking about sexual health risks, and it's actually designed as about 5 feet wide, 3 feet long. It's a poster board that you can actually put up in the classroom, and it goes through different levels of risk. The kids absolutely love this activity. because it got them engaged, they were having fun, and then they were actually learning about skills and information that would help them develop over the course of their lives. Now, just as a sampling of what can be learned about the development of youth in a curriculum development process, so that reflecting back over everything that I had gained in the study. So there were 3 overarching categories of information, and on what you see over there on the far column, the adolescent development characteristics, that's what's known about adolescents presently. In the center, you see the affected research process, and that's what we did to address and work with that characteristic in youth. So what we did in the focus groups, how we actually encouraged them to tell us, is that what you meant, so that member checking that we did, and then how the research process can actually then be enhanced through adolescent input on the other column. Now, as a result of doing this, youth were able to clearly identify that they experienced both negative connotations about their sexual health behavior from parents, from teachers, the broader community, and that in many ways they felt excluded. However, we were also able to look for solutions within that data. We have youth views now that can be incorporated into new curriculum resources, and this really shows that when you collaborate with adolescents to develop prevention resources that take into account their perceived needs and their unique perspectives, that this approach is really one that's underutilized in prevention research. There are some implications for practice. We found that there probably does need to be a more visible role for nurses with sexual health expertise. There's some work to be done with confidentiality and partnership building with youth in small rural communities. And I just offer this, that it's probably time to consider a more adolescent-centered approach to curriculum development. Now, despite the many things that I did to enhance the credibility of this study, this may represent a more motivated sample than the population from which we drew it from. We did ask teachers to help us identify students who worked well in groups because we had no other way to do that. I am reporting on a small number of participants from 2 grades, and I really do have no assurance that the findings have meaning for students who may be in lower grades where schools initiate the curricula for this type of prevention, or to other students who may be marginalized because of orientation, because they're immigrant youth, because they're Aboriginal youth, or just plain because they decided not to participate in the study. This study does contribute knowledge. We have strategies and insights proposed to maximize the unique contributions of adolescents. We have tangible curriculum resources. This is the evidence that when you engage youth in a process, their views who are often left silent, they do come to the fore, and you can incorporate them into curriculum. For myself, there's still a further piece of knowledge translation to do. I'd like to be able to just hand over a nicely composed package for teachers or nurses so that they could actually implement these within the classroom. And I'd like to test this participatory approach as an education intervention. So when I finish, I'd just like to say that this was working with youth to promote greater inclusion of their sexual health needs, and there are many positive influences, and there can be successes which depend on numerous factors. Even though they live in a province where they may have limited access to youth-friendly sexual health services, and there are some circumstances that narrow the discussions about sex education, this didn't preclude these students from identifying solutions to overcome those factors. Thank you so much.